The content of this podcast has not been evaluated by Health Canada or the FDA. It is educational in nature and should not be taken as medical advice. Always consult a qualified medical professional to see if a diet, lifestyle change, or supplement is right for you. Any supplements mentioned are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please note that the opinions of the guests or hosts are their own and may not reflect those of Advanced Orthomolecular Research Incorporated. Welcome to Supplementing Health, a podcast presented by Advanced Orthomolecular Research. We are all about applying evidence-based and effective dietary, lifestyle, and natural health product strategies for your optimal health. In each episode, we will feature very engaging clinicians and experts from the world of functional and naturopathic medicine to help achieve our mission to empower people to live their best lives naturally.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Supplementing Health. I'm very excited today because we have with us Risa Groux, a certified nutritionist who is taking on a whole new world of functional food medicine and really applying holistic principles to food and health and overall wellness. And we're really excited to kind of talk to you today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So a lot of our listeners are very mindful of what they're consuming and their health in general. What would you kind of say is the difference between functional foods and just eating?
Great question. So I am a functional nutritionist. I am certified as a clinical nutritionist, but I am a functional nutritionist because I have done extensive training in functional medicine and functional nutrition, meaning that we're always looking at root causes. We don't believe that there's a pill for an ill. We believe that there is something driving an illness. And then we look at the whole body as a whole unit versus each appendage or each different area of the body not intersecting as a whole unit. And then the other thing that we do in functional nutrition is we look at prevention. So we look at preventing disease before it already gets there, where conventional medicine's looking a little bit more at treating a disease when you already have it. With that definition in place of who I am, and that's how I look at things. So functional foods are foods that basically work for you versus eating foods that are not necessarily helping you. So I categorize them into two different categories. So one I call food for sport, and the other I call food for survival. And I believe that if we eat more food for survival and less food for sport, we're gonna thrive. We're gonna thrive and survive, right? We have so many chemicals in our system. Here in America, the FDA has approved 86,000 chemicals. That is just an amazing number of chemicals that we are allowed to eat, over 3,000 of which we can consume. And then the other ones we can breathe and put on our skin, which we are doing day in and day out. No other country has as many as we do. So we are completely attacked by chemicals all the time. So functional foods are foods that your body knows what to do with it. It knows how to process it. It was actually built for that. I say to each new client that I work with that I want you to imagine that your body's like a sneaker factory, right? You've got all the equipment to make sneakers. And if I give you leather, rubber, or canvas, I know we're going to get a sneaker at the end, right? It may change in shape or size or color, but it's going to be a sneaker. And if I say to you, let's put some cell phone parts in your sneaker factory, what would you say? And most people would say, you know what, that wouldn't work. Because imagine if we did put cell phone parts in a sneaker factory, we would start to break down that equipment. And that's a very loose example of what we're doing to our bodies. Our bodies were actually well equipped to eat foods that we're supposed to eat, right? Things that were crawling on the ground and sprouting from the earth. And all of a sudden we started adding chemicals, and our body doesn't know how to eat those foods. It doesn't know how to process those foods. It does a lot of destruction. The liver has to convert it into enzymes that it knows what to do with. The kidney has to clear it through the system. There's a lot of work that entails from eating foods that are not functional, right? And a lot of destruction in their wake. So I'm all about eating foods for survival and less for sport.
I love that you break it down into these you've amoralized it. And I find that a lot of times when it comes to food, there's a lot of moral association. This is a good food. This is a bad food. And then coming with that is sometimes guilt or shame. And what I love about how you've repositioned as food for sport versus survival is that it tends to take that morality out of it. And are you finding that with that approach, patient or clients of yours are tending to stay more engaged? And is there that association? Are you finding that emotional association with the food?
People as a whole, I work with so many people. I see about 40 to 50 people a week, and people as a whole they thrive when they eat foods that are good for them. When their system is working and they're eating foods, they have a good relationship with food. You know, I always say that eating clean is the highest form of self-respect. So when you are in control, you are showing yourself self-respect, you're eating foods that make you feel good, you're not having a constant conversation in your head saying, oh, I can't believe I ate that, I wasn't going to eat that, I was planning not to eat that, oh, well, forget it, I'll just eat everything I want, and then I'll wait till Monday, or I'll wait till after Christmas, or I'll wait till after my birthday or that vacation. You know, it's a lot of banter that people have, and it really is this horrible relationship that we have with food, when it really is just our mechanics, right? It's our fuel. We need fuel to function. And when we're not eating that food, we have a lot of angst about it. When we do eat clean, all of a sudden that conversation, that judgment, that punitive conversation that you're having in your head disappears. So people feel good. And then they realize that once I start putting in real fuel in my body, I don't need as much food. So it's fascinating. One of my favorite things that I do in my work is to watch that light bulb go on and watch the transformation of that relationship with food. It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we talk or learn enough about that relationship, because it is a relationship with food, and the fact that you contextualized it for your clients to be a whole body approach, and that things aren't occurring in silos. You know, your conditions aren't just happening to one part of your body, they're happening to your whole body. Now, you've developed the food frame method. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you were able to create these 6 different groups, and just expand on that a little for us?
Love to. So when I was growing up, I remember my mom and my grandma, they were always on diets. You know, they were just, oh, that's fattening, I can't eat that. And, you know, I'm always on a diet. And I thought, well, I don't understand. Why can't you eat that? Or you can eat this. And it was also confusing. And then, you know, going through my life and I guess in college, and I was always pretty healthy and exercised and ate fairly well. But, you know, there was always maybe 3 or 5 pounds that I was always working on, right? And so I would go on this diet because my girlfriend told me about that diet, and she lost a bunch of weight, but I really didn't. Or then I would lose a bunch of weight on this diet, but then somebody else didn't. And it was always fascinating to me. Why is one size does not fit all? It's food. And what I realized when I became a nutritionist and started working with tons of people is that not everybody works with every different food. And it mostly is because of your health status. So if you're in an autoimmune state, or you have a lot of antibodies, let's say to your thyroid, let's say you have some Hashimoto's, you should not be eating things like gluten and soy and dairy. right? Those are going to harm your situation. Those are going to make you cause more inflammation. When there's a lot of inflammation, there's no way you're going to lose weight. I mean, I shouldn't say no way, but the chances are less likely, and you're going to lose much less efficiently than you would if you were eating foods that are not causing an inflammatory response. So what I realize is that we're all different, right? If I have somebody walks into my office and they've got a very high level of diabetes, a lot of sugar dysregulation, they've got insulin resistance, I'm going to recommend keto or paleo for them, because that is really a very efficient way to decrease your blood sugars. I'm going to give them some supplement support as well, but I'm going to steer them in that direction of that eating lifestyle. Now, it probably won't be forever. It's just until we regulate that blood sugar, and then we figure out what their health status is at that point and what else to eat. Where do you go from there? But, there's no bad food, really. It's just not perfect. It's not a perfect fit for everyone. Yeah. So what I created was the ability to take this test, or just to find out what your blood test is and your stool test is, and see, do we have parasites, pathogens? Do we have candida? Are we having autoimmune? Are we, we have rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, you don't want to be having lots of nightshades. Nightshades are highly inflammatory. They're high in lectins. They're going to cause inflammation. So that person I would steer clear. I'd put them on a low lectin or an AIP, the autoimmune protocol diet, eating lifestyle. So, and that's, we personalize everything. Now our TVs know what shows we like to watch. Our music knows what kind of music we like to watch. We should be customizing our food to your particular health status. So that's what I did, was I broke it down and said, this is how we do it. Because I have a ton of people who come into my office and say, I've been doing keto for 3 months. I haven't lost anything, but my husband's lost 45 pounds. Well, you're not right for keto, right? So that's why we customize it. And that's what Food Frame does, is it customizes it to your health status.
You have touched on a few really important and salient points. And one I want to expand on a little is, you reference that there's a time period in which you do some of these potentially more restrictive or specific diets. And then there's a period where you reassess. And I think that is so important for people to hear, because sometimes there can be this feeling that this is indefinite, that they are on a very particular route for the rest of their life, and particularly if they already have had troubled relationship with food, that ability to reassess and check back in is so important. So the time period becomes really important. And then you also spoke to our current health status, guiding some of the decisions as to where to put them in the different groups. Now, how much are you finding that, with access to genetic insights, that the genetic predisposition in combination with obviously our environment and our experiences is impacting our ability to metabolize, absorb, utilize the nutrients from foods we're eating?
I love that you asked this question, because this is the future. This is where we're going. I was just at a functional medicine conference about a month ago, and all we are talking about is genetics, because we now know that our genetics are a huge roadmap for us. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that is where your destination is, but it's a roadmap saying that if you do not change this is your likelihood. So you can make a left instead of going straight, but you just need to know what that looks like. So I do a lot of genetic testing in my office. And in fact, last week I met with somebody I've been working with for a long time, who was the perfect example of what I mentioned earlier, that she has done keto for so long, and we did her genetic testing, And we looked at 77 genes, and we looked at, power, strength, and what exercise is best for her, how she does with dairy, caffeine, gluten, things like that. And we looked at saturated fat and all different kinds of fat breakdown for her. Now, I had already tested her on her what we call steatocrit, which is your fat malabsorption. I can find that from a stool test. And I'm looking at your GGT to see if your bile is sticky and gooey in your blood test. That will help me also determine if you have a hard time digesting fats. But she was fine on those. But her genetic test showed that she doesn't do well with high fats, and she was on keto. So she was that perfect example of what I was talking about. And we both kind of giggled and said, yeah, this is, why you didn't do well on keto for all that time. But genetics play a huge part in where we're going. My dream is that when my grandchildren are born, whenever that may be, that they take their blood that day and they say, here's your genetic makeup, this is what works for you, this is what doesn't, and here's your roadmap. That's what I hope will happen for our next generation or the generation thereafter, because we have the science. We know that genes play a big part. Environment is a huge, I often say, well, genes will load the gun, but environment will pull the trigger. So if you're exposed to mold, if you have a high stress life, if you're eating tons of gluten, dairy, high sugar, high carbs, a bad diet, lots of alcohol, no sleep, that's going to pull the trigger, right? Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that because you have these genes, this is your destiny. It just means that it's likely to be your destiny unless you do something about it. So now that we know we have genetic testing, we should all get our genetic testing done to find out, where do we need to make that left turn? How can we prevent this? Or, in some cases, this is how I should eat. This is best for my body. So it's just helpful information.
Yeah, and as you're talking about preventative medicine, sometimes prevention and motivating people to change their behaviors now to reduce the likelihood of something happening, 5, 10, 15 years in the future can be challenging. And having some of these insights, I find, especially for my patients, can help motivate them in seeing that long-term benefit versus, not having any data points. I also think it's important that you've mentioned, the access to genetic testing is really increasing. And even testing in your office, you mentioned some of those additional, you do stool testing, you also do blood testing. How important do you find those lab values are to have, and how regularly are you generally assessing patients?
So, I always say to my patients, I'm not really good at playing darts with the lights off. If I can't see the target, I'm guessing. It's going to cause a lot of frustration on everybody's part. So I'm much better when all the lights are on and I can see the target clearly. So that's why I do the testing. So I do a very extensive, comprehensive blood panel. I'm looking at gene mutation MTHFR because that's a huge factor in our methylation processes and our red blood cells. And I'm also, I look at all 4 markers of blood sugar, all 10 markers of thyroid. I look at all inflammatory markers, the breakdown of white blood cells, so that you can see, do we have an underlying virus of cytomegalovirus or Epstein-Barr virus or something else? Do we have other things that are causing any kind of symptoms? I'm always taking a pretty deep dive that way. And then I do the stool testing, and that I'm looking for about 84 pathogens. Again, parasites, worms, fungus, candida, giardia, parasitic pathogens. I'm looking at the microbiome, the good and bad gut bacteria, because that is, at the end of the day, is critically important to our health. If our microbiota is not good, we are going to experience ill health. So I am always looking at foundational issues, one being systemic inflammation and the other being gut health. I use those. Every person who walks in my office gets at minimum those tests. If I need to order further tests after I see those, then we do. So I do an initial when somebody walks in my door for the first time, and then usually 3 months later, I'm reordering the blood work. And then depending on what the stool test comes back with, if they are riddled with certain things, H. pylori is a big one that I treat, and all the other pathogens that we're addressing, I'll do that about 12 to 14, maybe 15 weeks later, and do I'll retest on the stool test to see where we are. And I love that. That's my favorite appointment, because those are the ones that we say, oh, wow, look at the inflammation markers are down, or you're no longer diabetic or pre-diabetic, or, it's amazing. I can usually tell by symptoms and, of course, weight loss, because if we're not in an inflamed state, we're losing that weight. But it's always great to see it right there in the numbers and the comparison of the before and after. So after that, depending on how the client is, we may need to do another follow-up 3 months later, or if not, it's going to be 6 months, and then we'll do it every year to 6 months thereafter, just to make sure they're doing okay.
Yeah, I like that there's a very unique, special moment when someone sees that the hard work they've put in is starting to shift things, and also that feedback. Oh my gosh, it's a great moment.
You know that well. So it's such a great thing to experience with somebody.
Yeah. Now you've spoken quite a lot to your training and additional, the conferences you've been going to as a functional medicine practitioner. How are you finding that the research is now starting to shift, given that more and more people are becoming interested in functional medicine and functional health, and taking on more of a holistic approach? How do you think that's translating to the research?
So that's a great question. So what functional nutrition, functional medicine looks at are the underlying root causes, as I mentioned. And so I think, COVID's a great example. Let's use COVID. So we have this horrendous pandemic that's going on. It's a virus, right? So viruses, where do viruses live, right? So viruses cannot live in an acidic environment. They just can't. They can't live in acid. They can't live in bleach. So that's why I'm a huge proponent of enzymes, digestive enzymes. And most of us don't have enough digestive enzymes. We produce and excrete them from the time we're born to the time we die. But as we age, we produce and excrete less and less. So that's why I'm a big proponent of it, number one. And, the whole medical community, conventional medicine, is always pushing antacids if there's any kind of GERD or acid reflux or heartburn, and that turns off your faucet. So you're creating a very alkalized environment, which is basically like putting a vacancy sign up saying, anybody come live in my gut. I'll feed you bread, sugar, dairy, and alcohol. You can thrive and survive. So we really want to go the opposite way. So I think we need a louder voice, whether that's more research or a louder voice as far as what really, that the gut is critical. The gut is critical. And a lot of integrative naturopaths, integrative medicine docs, and functional medicine docs are talking about the gut. But I think that needs to be more mainstream. We don't talk about it in hospitals. We don't talk about it in conventional medicine visits. I shouldn't say nobody, but very few doctors are really making the connection of what you're eating, what you're putting in and on your body is affecting that. I work with lots of doctors. They come and see me as patients, and they're unaware of these things. They haven't been trained. It's just not the way we do medical school. So I really would love to see a shift in that. If I were to have one wish, that would for sure be what it is. When we have lots of inflammation, and we can have inflammation if we're obese, we have inflammation. If we have blood sugar dysregulation, we have inflammation. If we have any autoimmune, we have inflammation. Inflammation is a real thing, and it's a driver of disease. And we are not talking about that as much. So, we go to the doctor, we have inflammation, they give you an anti-inflammatory. They don't say cut out these inflammatory foods, get some sleep, exercise. What are you doing to alleviate that stress that's causing inflammation? So it is, my dream would be, and where I feel the disconnect is somebody needs to stand on a soapbox with a megaphone screaming from the top of their lungs, let's look at root causes. How do we build our immunity? I test for a secretory IgA in the gut to see what your immune system looks like in your gut. How big is your army? So if we're in an inflamed state, I can tell you our secretory IgA is probably pretty low. So that's the conversation I feel like we need to be having. That's what I wish mainstream research was divulging and releasing over and over and over again. It's, my frustration with COVID was we shut down all the gyms, but you could get donuts and big gulps delivered to your door. So we've got this all backwards, right? What we eat matters. And I'm not saying that eating carrots are going to prevent COVID, but it's a whole body system that we do have some power here. And the power is to work on your gut and make sure you're building your immunity. And not just for COVID, but for anything that attacks us.
Right. Now, you speak, inflammation can be such a huge topic and quite tricky to manage and treat. You mentioned earlier an anti-inflammatory protocol diet, some therapeutic approaches. Generally, how are you approaching inflammation? Is it a stage-wise approach? Do you often include supplements, or is there a period where you need to be more aggressive and then you transition to a maintenance? How do you approach inflammation in general?
So anybody who's an autoimmune, if they have one or more autoimmune diseases, I have what I call the Fab Five for autoimmune. So vitamin D is critical. Vitamin D is huge for immunity. It's huge for everything. So vitamin D, omegas, omega-3 fatty acids, those are extraordinarily helpful for fighting inflammation. Glutathione is our master antioxidant. It's what helps us against any oxidative stress. Resveratrol is also very helpful with any kind of inflammation. It helps, it's an anti-inflammatory and it's natural. And no, it's not from drinking a bottle of wine that we get that resveratrol. We take it in supplement form. And then the other is turmeric. Turmeric is a huge anti-inflammatory agent. And so I use turmeric not just in cooking, but I take turmeric every single solitary day in supplement form. And all those that I work with who have autoimmune, they're taking those Fab Five. So if you don't have autoimmune and I see your inflammation markers, your C-reactive protein or your homocysteine, if you're elevated inflammatory markers, I am going to give you a lot of turmeric, and I'm going to say, go as high as you need to. If you get diarrhea, you've gone too far, back it up just a little bit. But you should have high doses of turmeric to help quell that inflammation. And then, of course, diet is huge. So take out the inflammatory foods. We know that all bread, gluten, dairy is a huge, highly inflammatory food. It's got tons of chemicals and hormones and antibiotics in there. Sugar. There really isn't a bigger inflammatory food than sugar. Sugar is highly inflammatory. And alcohol. Lots of people drink lots of alcohol daily. It's a great source for inflammation. And exercise, of course, helps. Not overly abundant exercise, but whatever you feel is right for you. Just moving your body will help with inflammation. Sleep is a huge factor for inflammation. So we don't sleep enough. If you're not sleeping through the night, something's going on. You should be addressing that. If you're not getting enough sleep, that needs to be addressed. And then lifestyle. We are all very plugged into our electronics. We need to get off the phones, off the computers, and laugh and sit in silence sometimes, or do meditation, or read a book, or just create space that is not so stimulating all the time. We have so many things coming at us that we're not built that way. It drives up our cortisol and we're going to get inflammation that way. So it's going to mess with your digestion. Stress is a real thing. So those are the components of an anti-inflammatory lifestyle.
And what do you find tends to be that line between when those dietary changes and some of those lifestyle changes are sufficient to when you actually really need to be supplementing or more aggressive in your therapy?
People who come to me tend to be inflamed. Let's say they're coming to me and they're not very inflamed. I would say eat some turmeric or take it once a day or not a lot. but generally people's inflammation is a little bit higher. If they don't need those anti-inflammatories, then I say don't take them. I mean, vitamin D is the exception to the rule. I always do vitamin D. If there's any kind of lipid situation, elevation, or there's cardiovascular disease, omega is something that I'm absolutely going to use as a tool in addition to food and lifestyle. So I do use supplements a lot. I find that they work. They're very expeditious. Can you do it without supplements? Yeah.
Yeah, I find, with the supplementation discussion with patients anytime, it's always helpful to frame it as, this may be for a period of time, it may be more indefinite. It really depends on, as you said, the current state of health.
Exactly.
But it then becomes a discussion of, okay, what is the difference between quality supplementation and, supplementation for the sake of it? So what do you tend to look for when you're selecting products or selecting,
So I'm really picky. I'm just really picky because I take a lot of supplements myself and I don't want any chemicals. I don't want any dyes. I'm always amazed people walk in with their supplements and I won't mention any brands or any stores that make them, but there are so many colorings in our supplements and all of our medications, the purple pill, the blue pill, the pink pill. Why do we need dyes in our medications and our supplements? I don't understand that. So those go in the trash right away. The other thing that you find in a lot of mainstream supplements is soybean oil, which is crazy to me. That's such an inflammatory oil. So soybean oil, if I see that on the label, that's going in the trash right away. So those are two really big things that I don't particularly like. And there's I look for quality. So I am absolutely not having any gluten, any soy, any dairy in any of my supplements. And I manufacture a ton of my own supplements because of this reason, because it's hard to source them when it's hard to source clean supplements. So I make my own. So I look for just very clean ingredients, minimal and highly absorbable. That's the other trick that mainstream supplements have, is that they're looking at price points. So they want a higher margin, and so they will put in, let's say, magnesium or calcium. There's different grades of those that take several steps to absorb through the body. And so if you have a multivitamin, for instance, those have very low levels there's lots of conversions that need to take place for you to actually absorb that magnesium or calcium. So the likelihood of you absorbing any calcium in that supplement is slim to none. So you're paying a ton of money for these minimal nutrients that you're probably not even getting anyway or absorbing. So I am really, really, really picky. I don't spend a lot of money on clothes, but I do spend a lot of money on my food and my supplements, because that is what's going into my body, and I want to make sure that it's super clean and not causing any further destruction. So hard to source clean nutraceuticals tend to be better. Even places like Whole Foods and health stores, they still have stuff that is not that great. They do have a lot of stuff that is good, but you have to read labels. I read labels on everything.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about the dyes. It's so funny to me that that's still an issue, because there are so many natural dyes that, the chlorophyll or the beet-based dyes that naturally can give you a uniform color, but don't necessarily carry any of that extra risk or weight.
Yeah, I don't know. Is it banned in Canada? You can't do that there?
No, it still occurs. I mean, we still get our red dyes and yellow dyes, but it's not necessary from a manufacturing process, which I find interesting, because we've evolved and technology has advanced. So why do we still do it? Probably,
Right.
Ease of use, and like you said, there's a drive to mass produce things very quickly. But I love that you speak to quality and assessing labels. Do you tend to give your patients and clients just a quick list of I know you mentioned soybean oil, but any other tips when they're looking at labels, like the
Oh,
salt?
yes.
Or
Yep. So I have a lot of that, how to read a label. I have, I give people handouts every time I work with them, whether it's by Zoom, we email it, or I hand them out in my office, and we talk about the inflammatory oils and what are good oils, what has a high smoke point that won't cause inflammation. I give as much information as I possibly can. I talk a lot about chemicals in here. I'm a big fan of detoxing. I'm my own 14-day detox, which I recommend for a lot of people. It helps balance out hormones and helps clean out the pipes, basically. And of course, people love it because they experience weight loss. But I always say this is not a weight loss program. Yes, you will lose weight, but this is about cleaning the system and increasing your good gut health and decreasing your systemic inflammation, putting bumpers on the lane, and so that you are eating clean, real foods. Nothing's coming out of a package. It's all from a farm and not a factory. So I think we need to do that for at least 14 days a year. I recommend it a few times a year, but at least 14 days a year. You'll feel fantastic. But I do want people to be educated. Cooking, pots and pans, that's another amazing source for chemicals, and people don't realize it. So I do a lot of handouts on that. I talk about that quite a bit. And beauty supplies, that's a huge driver. I mean, us women, we shave our armpits and then we put this deodorant on that is filled with aluminum and parabens and dyes and perfumes and all kinds of chemicals that are endocrine disruptors. And they wonder why they have all this excess estrogen. Cleaning supplies are a huge factor in that. We have tons of chemicals and perfumes and air sanitizers. Those are huge. And now, of course, we have hand sanitizers. So that's everywhere. And so those have tons of perfumes and dyes and things like that. It's just, why do we need all these chemicals? There's always a natural way to do something. And I encourage people, Google it if you don't know. Apple cider vinegar is basically the trick for everything, right? I use apple cider vinegar to clean almost everything. It cleans my pipes in my shower and my drains. And, it's almost like a miracle. That and baking soda, you can really kind of take care of the whole house with those two things. But, our toothpaste, it's just filled with dyes and colorings and chemicals and fluoride and things that we don't need, that are not helping to clean our teeth. So I want people to be conscious of it. I just want you to read labels and look and be picky about what's going into the building, right? We have to be concerned about what's going inside.
Are you ever concerned, that because some of these things are so ubiquitous and fairly accessible, that it becomes a barrier of entry for a lot of clients, is that they're not able to? I mean, you kind of mentioned a very interesting point, which is your investment in supplements. It's that you're making that choice to then invest in certain areas. How do you kind of coach and guide people when they're saying, well, I just can't invest in this right now, or I just don't have the time or energy?
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of help guide them?
So I get that it can be expensive, and quality is expensive, unfortunately. Not everybody needs 55 supplements. I try not to give people 55 supplements. I mean, I'm exaggerating. I give people what is necessary. And some people who say I can't take them, or I prefer liquids, I work around that. But some people will be on a fair amount of supplements, maybe 20 supplements, but it's a short period of time. It's what we're using to address something. If they're in really bad shape, and we've got a lot to work on, and I'll say to them, do you want to work on things one at a time? And
Right. Now, with the reintroduction or the transition phases, at those points, what are you recommending? How do you ease people back into maybe a different way of eating if they've been on anti-inflammatory protocol for quite a while?
So that transition, we usually do one at a time. And so eventually the goal is to eat all these foods. So you'll start to know because you start to read your body. You become very conscious about what you eat and how you feel. How does your body respond? Do I get stuffy? Do I get puffy? Do I get gas? Do I get diarrhea, bloated? Those are really great signs. And I always say to people, your body communicates with you. We just are not trained on how to read it. But when you work with me, you start to realize how your body communicates. So your body will tell you how long it will need and if it's ready and when it's not ready. And then you just go according to that. Tests help a lot, but at the end of the day, it's going to be your body that tells you.
Yeah, that is such an excellent note to end on, because it kind of culminates everything you've been saying is our relationship with food, our relationship with our body. These are interconnected and we just need to listen. Thank you for doing the work you do and also for sharing with us today. Individuals can always find you at risagrouxnutrition.com. And anywhere else they can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and all the, I do have a podcast that I don't do a lot, but it's called The Diet Dilemma. My book, Food Frame, is coming out January 7th. Very excited. I've had tremendous support from lots of people in the health community, Dr. Gundry, Dr. Josh Axe, Maria Shriver, it's been Suzanne Summers. It's been really, really great. I'm so grateful for it. And I do a lot of thyroid work, so we have a thyroid class that will be going live in March as well. So we've got lots of good stuff. It's the hub for really getting your health in order and addressing your root causes.
Well, that is amazing. And thank you so much. Congratulations on the book coming out.
Thank you for listening to Supplementing Health. For more information about our guests, past shows, and future topics, please visit aor.ca/podcast or aor.us/podcast. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? We invite you to engage with us on social media to request a future topic or email us at marketing@aor.ca.